The sky above Earth had turned into a battlefield. Alien warships, massive and menacing, blotted out the sun as they descended from orbit. The Zeleri had come, not to negotiate, not to warn, but to conquer. Their plasma cannons rained fire upon cities, leveling buildings, turning streets into molten craters, and reducing humanity's monuments to dust. Across the world, governments fell into chaos, scrambling to mount a defense against the overwhelming force. The Zelari had expected submission. They had conquered 100 worlds before, each one folding under their technological superiority. They assumed Earth would be no different. They were wrong. Amidst the rubble of New York, a lone soldier stood. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, his combat armor scorched from the fires of battle. His rifle, though battered, was still gripped tightly in his hands. The last remnants of his unit lay broken around him, their bodies strewn across the shattered concrete. He was alone, outnumbered, and surrounded by towering alien warriors. A Zeleri commander, standing nearly 9 feet tall, stepped forward. Its chitinous exoskeleton glistened under the flickering lights of burning skyscrapers. It sneered in its guttural language, believing the human was too weak to fight back. But the soldier wasn't afraid. He spat blood onto the ground and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then, through gritted teeth, he spoke words that would echo in history. "You dared attack Earth, now you'll pay." His words weren't just a threat, they were a promise, and the Zeleri would soon learn the terrifying truth about humanity. The resistance had begun. The first days of the invasion were a massacre, but humans didn't crumble. They adapted. The remaining armies across the world, once divided by borders and politics, now fought as one. Civilians became soldiers. Scientists turned their minds toward war. Factories that once made cars and computers now churned out weapons designed to exploit every weakness the aliens had. And their greatest weapon? Rage. The Zelari had never encountered anything like it. Most species they had conquered begged for mercy. They surrendered at the first sign of defeat. But humans fought even when they had nothing left. They didn't just defend. They hunted. In the ruins of Tokyo, a group of engineers hacked into the Zeleri's own systems, turning their war machines against them. In the forests of Brazil, guerrilla fighters used their intimate knowledge of the land to ambush the invaders, striking from the shadows like ghosts. In the icy wastelands of Siberia, human snipers picked off commanders from miles away, their shots precise and merciless. And in the skies above, Earth's surviving pilots waged a desperate aerial war, dodging alien lasers and missiles, pushing their outdated but resilient jets beyond their limits. The Zeleri may have had superior technology, but humans had something even more powerful: determination. The lone soldier who had stood against the commander in New York wasn't forgotten. His defiance spread like wildfire. Videos of his last stand, of his words, "You dared attack Earth, now you'll pay," were broadcast across every remaining human stronghold. He became a symbol, and soon Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for revenge. The tide of war was beginning to shift. The Zelari had expected a swift conquest. What they got was a war they weren't prepared to fight. For the first time in their history, they were afraid. The Zeleri fleet, once an unstoppable force of conquest, found itself caught in a nightmare it couldn't understand. The humans refused to surrender. Every inch of Earth's soil was a battleground, every city a fortress, every ruined street a death trap. The Zeleri had the numbers, the firepower, and the technology, but none of it seemed to matter. At first, they dismissed humanity's defiance as foolishness. They believed that crushing resistance was only a matter of time. But as days turned to weeks, that belief wavered. Then came the first true blow to their invasion. In the war-torn ruins of London, a squad of human engineers accomplished what no alien species had before. They captured a Zeleri command ship. It wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an act of war on a scale the Zelari had never encountered. Using reverse-engineered technology, human scientists worked around the clock to crack into the ship's systems. They learned the weaknesses of the Zelari fleet, dissecting their strategies, finding vulnerabilities no species had ever exploited before. And with that knowledge, the humans struck back harder than ever. Zelari battleships, once thought invincible, were suddenly falling from the sky. Their shields, once impenetrable, flickered and failed under precise human strikes. The same weapons they had used to rain destruction upon Earth were now being turned against them. For the first time, the Zeleri were not the hunters. They were the hunted. The turning point came when Earth's resistance, now organized into a single global force, launched a counteroffensive in the United States. The Zeleri had set up their primary war command center in Washington, D.C., believing that human leadership had been shattered. What they hadn't counted on was the sheer unpredictability of human ingenuity. The plan was brutal, desperate, and utterly brilliant. A coalition of former special forces, cyber warfare experts, and volunteer fighters infiltrated the heart of the Zelari's stronghold. Using stolen alien weapons, they moved like shadows through the night, cutting down patrols, sabotaging supply lines, and hacking into their systems. Then, when the moment was right, they sent a single message, broadcasted across every communication network the Zeleri used. It was a face the invaders recognized. The same soldier who had stood alone in New York, the one who had spoken the words that had become Earth's battle cry. His face was battered, his eyes burned with fury, and his voice was cold as steel. "We gave you a chance to leave. You didn't listen. Now it's our turn." And with that, the humans unleashed hell. Explosions erupted across Washington, D.C. in a synchronized assault. Resistance fighters emerged from the shadows, wielding both human and alien weapons, tearing through Zelari ranks with terrifying efficiency. Makeshift tanks, built from scavenged parts and repurposed enemy tech, rolled through the streets, crushing anything in their path. From the air, hacked Zeleri dropships, piloted by human defectors, rained fire down upon the enemy. The Zeleri, who had once believed Earth would fall within days, now found themselves surrounded, outgunned, and outmatched. But the true devastation came when the human hackers, embedded deep in the Zelari command center, finally executed their final move. They had cracked into the Zelari fleet's command network, and with one simple command, they shut it down. Across Earth's skies, alien ships powered down mid-flight. Their shields flickered and died. Their weapons ceased firing. A fleet that had once dominated the galaxy now hung helplessly in orbit, like prey awaiting the final blow, and the humans delivered it without hesitation. In a coordinated global strike, every remaining Earth defense force, every scavenged Zelari weapon, every fighter still able to stand turned their firepower upward. Missiles, railguns, plasma cannons, everything was unleashed in a final act of vengeance. The Zelari fleet, once proud and mighty, burned. And for the first time in history, the Zelari fled. But Earth wasn't finished. The war had begun with an invasion. Now it was time for retaliation. The Zeleri retreat was a sight never before witnessed in galactic history. Their empire had conquered 100 worlds, reduced civilizations to dust, and ruled with an iron grip for centuries. They had never lost a war. They had never fled from battle. Until now. The remnants of their once mighty fleet limped into deep space, their warships battered, their command structure shattered. Earth's skies, once darkened by the looming presence of alien dreadnoughts, were now filled with the smoking remains of their wreckage. But humanity wasn't celebrating. Not yet. The Zeleri had come to wipe Earth from existence. They had slaughtered millions, turned cities into graveyards, and forced an entire planet to the brink of extinction. And now that they were running, humanity had only one thing on its mind: revenge. As the last Zelari ships fled Earth's orbit, the new Human War Council gathered in what remained of Geneva. Once a place of peace and diplomacy, it now served as the nerve center for Earth's counterattack. Military leaders, scientists, and resistance fighters, those who had survived the invasion, stood around a holographic map of the galaxy. For the first time in history, humanity was united under one banner, and their first mission was clear. "Track their retreat," said General Vasquez, the hardened leader of Earth's surviving military forces. "I want to know exactly where they're running." A team of cyber warfare specialists using stolen Zeleri data worked through the night. By morning, they had their answer. The Zeleri were retreating to a fortified outpost in a nearby star system, a planet called Vorlax 7. It was a military stronghold, heavily defended, and home to tens of thousands of Zelari troops. Perfect. "We take the fight to them," said the soldier whose defiance had sparked the resistance. His name was Captain Eric Cole, and his face had become the symbol of Earth's rage. He pointed at the holographic display, eyes burning with fury. "They came here expecting an easy victory," he said. "Now we show them what it means to be hunted." Earth's forces had no grand fleet, no mighty warships, but they had something far deadlier: human ingenuity. They scavenged Zelari technology, reverse engineering it faster than anyone had thought possible. Within weeks, they had assembled a fleet of stolen alien ships, outfitted with human modifications, more aggressive targeting systems, enhanced maneuverability, and weapons fine-tuned for destruction. The Zeleri had underestimated humans once. They wouldn't live long enough to make that mistake again. The invasion fleet, made up of Earth's best pilots, soldiers, and cyber warfare units, launched from hidden bases across the world. Their mission wasn't just to strike back, it was to send a message. And that message was simple: you dared attack Earth, now we're coming for you. Vorlax 7 never saw them coming. The Zeleri, still reeling from their disastrous defeat, believed Earth was too weak to retaliate. Their defenses were lax, their forces unprepared. They had no idea that death was already falling from the sky. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm. They moved fast, hitting key targets before the Zeleri could react. Military installations exploded in massive fireballs. Defensive turrets were hacked and turned against their own soldiers. Then came the ground assault. Eric Cole and his team dropped onto the surface in stolen Zelari dropships, cutting through enemy lines like a blade through flesh. They fought with brutal efficiency, not as conquerors, but as executioners. For every human city that had burned, they burned 10 Zeleri outposts. For every human life lost, they took 100 in return. The Zeleri begged for surrender. Some tried to flee. Others threw down their weapons, hoping for mercy. Humanity had none to give. Vorlax 7 was turned into a graveyard. And it was only the beginning. Back on Earth, the news of the counterattack spread like wildfire. The people, once victims of an alien onslaught, now stood victorious. But they weren't content with just one battle. The war for vengeance had begun. No longer was humanity a species waiting for destruction. Now, they were the ones who would burn the galaxy down. The fall of Vorlax 7 sent shockwaves across the Zelari Empire. They had expected humanity to be another forgotten casualty in their long history of conquest. Instead, they had created a nightmare, a species that refused to die, that adapted faster than anything they had ever faced, and that was now fueled by nothing but vengeance. Across the galaxy, Zeleri governors and military officials scrambled to prepare defenses. Fleets were repositioned, fortress worlds were reinforced, entire sectors were locked down under martial law. None of it would be enough, because humanity had declared war, and war was all they knew now. On Earth, the captured Zeleri technology was being pushed to its absolute limits. Human engineers, fueled by rage and desperation, worked day and night to unlock the secrets of their enemies' machines. And in doing so, they created something terrifying. Within months, Earth's industrial centers, rebuilt from the ashes of invasion, began churning out warships at an unprecedented rate. But these weren't just stolen Zeleri designs. These were human warships, crafted with the sole purpose of annihilation. Faster, deadlier, more brutal than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their names were a warning, retribution, wrath, vengeance, hellfire, each one a promise that the Zelari's sins would be paid for in blood. And at the heart of this new fleet was a single ship, the largest, most fearsome warship humanity had ever built. Its hull was reinforced with scavenged Zelari plating. Its weapons were a mix of alien and human firepower, and its name was whispered like a prayer among Earth's soldiers. Judgment Day. Eric Cole stood on its bridge, staring out into the endless void of space. The war was far from over. The Zelari still held dozens of worlds under their rule, each one a reminder of the atrocities they had committed. "We take back what they stole," Cole said, his voice cold, his eyes burning. "We burn their empire to the ground." The officers around him nodded. There was no hesitation, no fear, because Earth had already suffered the worst the galaxy could throw at them. And now it was their turn to strike. The first target was Draelus Prime, a key Zelari supply world deep within their empire. It was heavily fortified, with orbital defenses and planetary shields that had stood untouched for centuries. The Zeleri believed it to be impenetrable. They were wrong. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like a hurricane. Unlike the Zeleri, who fought with precision and calculated strategy, humanity fought with rage. They didn't just disable enemy ships, they tore them apart. They didn't just invade the planet, they razed it. Zelari forces tried to hold the line. They failed. For every human that fell, 100 Zeleri died screaming. The battle lasted less than a day. By the time the sun set on Draelus Prime, the Zeleri flag had been torn down, and in its place stood something new. The symbol of Earth, the first conquered world of the human empire. Across the galaxy, word of humanity's retaliation spread like wildfire. Other species, once too afraid to resist the Zeleri, began to rise up. Rebel factions launched uprisings on occupied worlds. Entire colonies declared independence, and at the heart of it all was Earth. The Zelari had started this war. Now humanity would finish it. The fall of Draelus Prime was only the beginning. Humanity had tasted vengeance, and they would not stop until the Zelari Empire was nothing more than dust. Across the stars, human warships spread like wildfire. They struck with terrifying precision, appearing out of nowhere, dismantling Zelari defenses, and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The Zeleri, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, were being hunted. Their strongholds burned, their fleets shattered. Their leaders, once arrogant and untouchable, were now fleeing like rats, desperately searching for a place to hide. But there was nowhere left to run, because humanity was coming. On the bridge of Judgment Day, Captain Eric Cole stood with his arms crossed, staring at the holographic map of the Zelari Empire. It was vast, stretching across hundreds of systems, but it was bleeding, and humans were the ones holding the knife. "What's the next target?" he asked, his voice cold, his fury controlled but ever burning. A young strategist pointed to a planet deep in Zeleri-controlled space. Vorshak, a major shipyard. If we take it, they won't be able to replace their losses. Cole nodded. Then we take it. And just like that, humanity's next assault began. Vorshak was the lifeline of the Zelari military. It produced thousands of warships every year, each one meant to keep their empire in power. If it fell, the Zelari wouldn't just be weakened, they'd be crippled. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, every warship primed for destruction. Unlike before, they didn't waste time. There were no warnings, no negotiations. This wasn't war anymore. It was extermination. The first wave of human warships obliterated the orbital defenses in minutes. Precision strikes disabled the shipyard's automated defenses. Zelari fleets scrambled to counterattack, but they were too slow, too predictable. Humanity had learned from their enemy, and now they were better. The ground assault was just as brutal. Elite human soldiers, enhanced by stolen Zelari combat technology, dropped onto the planet's surface like avenging angels. They did not take prisoners. The Zelari, who had once enslaved and slaughtered weaker species without mercy, now found themselves on the receiving end of human wrath. Factories burned, shipyards crumbled, entire Zelari battalions were wiped out before they could even form a defense. By the time the battle was over, Vorshak was nothing more than a wasteland of twisted metal and shattered bodies. And humanity had won. Again. The Zelari Senate, once a council of rulers who controlled the galaxy without fear, was now in a state of panic. Every time they regrouped, humans struck. Every time they prepared for a counterattack, humans outmaneuvered them. And worst of all, every time they begged for peace, humanity ignored them, because Earth had not forgotten. They remembered the cities that burned, the millions who died, the families that had been wiped from existence, and they had sworn one thing. The Zelari would never get the chance to do it again. The war was reaching its final phase. There was only one place left to strike: the Zelari homeworld. It was time to end them. The Zelari homeworld, Zelvas, had stood for millennia as the unchallenged heart of their empire. A planet of towering obsidian spires, endless military complexes, and palatial seats of power where the Senate had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. It had never known war. Until now. Because Earth had come for vengeance. The human fleet arrived in Zelvas space like the wrath of a vengeful god. What was once a thriving system, filled with Zelari warships and bustling trade routes, was now a graveyard. Dozens of Zelari fleets, once meant to defend the Empire, had been annihilated in previous battles. Those that remained were a pale shadow of their former power, outnumbered, outgunned, and worst of all, afraid. And they had every reason to be. Because the humans didn't come to conquer. They came to destroy. On the Bridge of Judgment Day, Captain Eric Cole watched as his fleet moved into formation. Hundreds of human warships, some stolen from the Zelari and others built from the ruins of Earth's invasion, surrounded the planet like a noose tightening around its prey. The Zelari sent a desperate transmission. A plea for mercy. The Zelari never begged. And yet, here they were. Cole stared at the incoming message, his jaw tightening. He could still remember the screams of New York, the bodies burned to ash in Tokyo. The Zelari hadn't asked for mercy when they came for Earth, so why should humanity give them any? He shut the transmission off. "Commence orbital bombardment," he ordered, and the sky turned to fire. The Zelari homeworld had the strongest planetary shields in the galaxy. They lasted 4 hours before they collapsed. The first wave of human missiles turned their mighty spires into rubble. Plasma strikes shattered their golden palaces. Explosions tore through the streets where Zelari senators had once walked, believing they were untouchable. And then came the ground assault. Elite human soldiers, wearing armor crafted from scavenged alien tech, dropped into the cityscapes like harbingers of death. They moved like ghosts, their tactics precise, their weapons relentless. The Zelari military, once the terror of the galaxy, fought back with everything they had. It wasn't enough. For every human that fell, 100 Zelari died screaming. For every street they tried to defend, humans burned 10 of theirs in retaliation. This wasn't a battle. It was judgment. The Zelari Senate, the rulers of the Empire, made their final stand in the Grand Palace, the very heart of their dominion. They barricaded themselves behind walls of steel, surrounded by their finest warriors. They thought they could negotiate, that if they surrendered they could save themselves. They still didn't understand. Humanity wasn't interested in peace. Cole led the final assault himself. His team breached the palace doors, cutting through Zelari guards like they were nothing. The senators, trembling, pleaded for their lives. They offered power. They offered wealth. Cole raised his rifle. "You dared attack Earth," he said coldly. Then he pulled the trigger, and the Zelari Empire died. The war was over. Zelvas burned. The last of the Zelari fleets were destroyed. Their species, once the rulers of the galaxy, were now nothing more than scattered survivors, running from the ghosts of the billions they had slaughtered. And humanity? Humanity had won. But they had become something else in the process. They were no longer just survivors. They were now the new rulers of the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The age of Earth had begun. The fires of Zelvas burned for weeks. The once glorious capital of the Zelari Empire had been reduced to ash and ruin. Its towering spires, once symbols of power, were now nothing but crumbling skeletons under a sky choked with smoke. The last remnants of the Zelari people, those who had managed to survive, wandered through the ruins like ghosts. They had once ruled the stars. Now they were a broken, dying species, and Earth had made sure of it. On board Judgment Day, Eric Cole stood on the bridge, watching as the fires of the Zelari homeworld flickered below. His face, once filled with rage, was now stone cold. Victory should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt empty. "We did it," one of his officers said beside him. "We won." Cole exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening into fists. Had they really won? They had avenged Earth, yes. But in doing so, they had become something else entirely. Humanity was no longer the underdog fighting for survival. Now, they were the new conquerors, and the galaxy would never forget it. The destruction of the Zelari Empire sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Species that had once suffered under the Zelari's rule celebrated their downfall. On distant planets, the enslaved were now free, their chains broken by Earth's wrath. But not everyone saw humanity as saviors. To some, they were worse than the Zelari. The speed at which humans had adapted to war terrified the rest of the galaxy. No species had ever fought back like Earth. No civilization had ever turned their suffering into pure, unrelenting vengeance. Now, whispers spread through the void. The galaxy had traded one master for another, and Earth was far more dangerous. Across the ruins of their once great empire, the last surviving Zelari begged for mercy. Some tried to flee into the shadows of the galaxy, hoping to hide on uncharted worlds. Others surrendered, pleading for their lives. But Earth was divided. Many humans demanded total extermination. They wanted the Zelari wiped from existence, just as they had tried to do to Earth. Others, however, argued for mercy. A small faction believed that if humanity destroyed an entire species, they would be no better than the monsters they had fought against. A vote was held among Earth's new leaders. The decision? The Zelas would be exiled. The surviving remnants of their species were loaded onto ships and sent into the deep void, banished from the known galaxy. They would wander the stars forever, their once mighty empire nothing more than a ghost story. But some whispered that the Zelas would never forget. And one day, they might return. With the Zelas destroyed, Earth stood alone as the most powerful force in the galaxy, and power demanded order. The leaders of the resistance, once ordinary soldiers and freedom fighters, now became rulers. A new government was formed, not a democracy, but a militarized empire, forged in the fires of war. Earth no longer fought for survival. Now they ruled the stars. Human fleets patrolled former Zelas space, enforcing their own laws. Entire planets swore loyalty to the human empire. Some did so willingly. Others? They didn't have a choice. The other alien species, once oppressed by the Zelas, were now terrified of humanity. They had cheered when Earth destroyed their former masters. But as the smoke cleared, they began to wonder if they had simply traded one tyrant for another. Some of them tried to resist Earth's rule. They were crushed. The message was clear. Submit or suffer the fate of the Zelas. Some species bowed immediately, swearing allegiance to the new human empire. Others vanished into deep space, hoping to avoid Earth's wrath. But a few whispered of rebellion, because in every empire there are always those who refuse to kneel. Not all humans were proud of what Earth had become. Some remembered when humanity had fought for freedom, not conquest, when they had been defenders, not rulers. Now, they were becoming the very thing they had once hated. A secret resistance began to grow within Earth's own ranks. Soldiers who once fought for vengeance now fought for redemption. They called themselves the Last Light. Their goal? To stop the human empire before it became a new age of terror. And if that meant fighting their own people, so be it. As Earth spread its dominion across the stars, something stirred in the darkness, something ancient, something far worse than the Zelas. A deep space probe, launched from Earth's capital, disappeared near the dead systems, a region of space so feared that even the Zelas had never dared explore it. Before the signal was lost, it sent back one final transmission, a single image, a fleet, not Zelas, not human, something else, and then a voice, a deep, unfathomable voice that sent chills through every scientist who heard it. We see you, Earth. We watched you destroy the Zelas. Now, we are coming. Humanity had fought to survive. They had conquered to avenge. But now they would face something beyond war, because the true test of Earth's might was only just beginning. The message from the dead systems sent a ripple of fear through Earth's leadership. For years, humanity had been the unstoppable force, the hunters, the conquerors, the rulers. They had burned the Zelas Empire to the ground, reduced their enemies to ash, and established themselves as the dominant power in the galaxy. But now, something else was watching them. Something older than the Zelas, something that had never feared them. And worst of all, it was coming. Earth's War Council, once a symbol of human unity, was split. Some wanted to prepare for war, to strike first before this unknown threat could act. Others argued that Earth had already lost too much, that they couldn't afford another war so soon. But Eric Cole? He had seen too much death. He had fought too long. And in his gut, he knew one thing. We have to be ready. So in secret, Earth's top scientists, engineers, and strategists began preparing for the worst. They built weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They trained soldiers for a war against the unknown. They sent scouts into the dead systems, searching for answers. But none of them returned. The first true encounter happened 6 months later, a deep space human fleet patrolling the edge of known space, vanished without a trace. At first, Earth thought it was an accident, a malfunction, a jump drive failure. Then, a single escape pod drifted back into human space. Inside, a lone survivor, a man who had been driven mad. His eyes were hollow, his body covered in scars that weren't made by any known weapon. He screamed when they tried to question him. He clawed at his own face, repeating the same phrase over and over again. They aren't like the Zeleri. They don't conquer. They consume. Then, before anyone could stop him, he took his own life. Humanity had believed they were the most dangerous force in the galaxy. They were wrong, because something far worse had arrived. They were called the Nightfall, a species that didn't conquer, didn't enslave, didn't negotiate. They erased. Their ships were monstrous, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Black, jagged, pulsating with energy that didn't register on human scanners. Their weapons didn't fire beams or projectiles. They ripped reality apart, turning entire warships into dust in seconds. And their soldiers? They weren't alive. They were shadows, figures wrapped in obsidian armor that moved faster than human eyes could follow. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They devoured everything in their path. And now, they had set their sights on Earth. The war against the Nightfall wasn't a war. It was a slaughter. Human fleets, once unstoppable, were ripped apart like paper. Planets fell in days, their populations erased without a trace. Weapons that had crushed the Zeleri did nothing against this new enemy. For the first time since Earth's rise to power, humanity was outmatched. And for the first time, Eric Cole felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. But humanity had not fought this long just to die. They had one last chance, a desperate, reckless plan that could either save them or end them forever. The scientists of Earth discovered something: a weakness. The Nightfall weren't invincible. Their ships, their soldiers, they weren't from this universe. They were intruders, existing in a half-reality, slipping in and out of space like ghosts. That's why conventional weapons did nothing. That's why no one could stop them. But if Earth could rip open the veil between realities, if they could expose the Nightfall fully, they could kill them. It was a gamble, a final stand. And if it failed, there would be nothing left of Earth. No history, no memory, nothing. The last of Earth's fleets gathered above the burning remains of Mars. It was here that humanity would make its last stand. The Nightfall came in the millions. Their black, jagged warships filled the sky, darkening the stars. And then, Eric Cole gave the order. Activate the Rift Bomb. A device, built with every last ounce of Earth's technology, tore a hole through reality itself. And suddenly, the Nightfall weren't untouchable anymore. Human weapons, for the first time, hit their mark. The impossible, invincible enemy bled, and humanity unleashed hell. The battle lasted 3 days. Earth's fleet was all but destroyed. Millions of humans died. Entire planets were lost forever. But the Nightfall? They were eradicated. The Rift Bomb had done what no species had ever dared. It had closed the gateway between dimensions, trapping the Nightfall in their own world forever. Humanity had won, but at a cost no one could comprehend. Earth was no longer just a survivor, no longer just an empire. They had become something else entirely. They had killed gods, and the galaxy would never recover. The war had ended. But as Eric Cole stood on the ruins of Mars, staring at the sky, he knew the truth. Something else was out there, something watching, something waiting. And one day, it would come for them. But when that day arrived, humanity wouldn't run. They wouldn't beg. They would do what they had always done. They would fight. And this time, They would win. Because Earth never forgets, and Earth never forgives. The age of humanity had only just begun.